It's now 5 o'clock and I'm gonna call to order the Concord Carlisle School Committee.
And I will call the Concord School Committee to order.
Okay, joining us tonight, we have Attorney Peter Subners, who is our district attorney, and he's here to do a workshop for us. So he has prepped this and we're gonna ask questions throughout it. If anyone has a question, feel free to be a little bit more interactive. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely.
You can stop for questions, whatever you want.
Yeah, so I can monologue for an hour or you all can interrupt me, but this is intended to be a workshop for the school committee, so I think that it's better for you all. Ask questions as you have them. I'll be happy to talk about them. I have some slides here to go over a few topics with the school committee. And the focus tonight, or the overarching theme tonight, is going to be essentially school committee communications and school committee access and distribution of information. And I think that the best way to go about that is to talk about what the school committee's role is, and then talk about public records, talk about the open meeting law, and then talk about school committee member responsibilities. So that's how I've organized this. I'm happy to go out of order if a question comes up. But that's sort of what you can expect to hear about tonight. On public records in the open meeting law, each of those topics I could spend 2 hours talking to you about each of them individually. So I'm not going to go into incredible depth on those. It's more just I'm going to touch on them and talk about how they relate in this context. I have an hour tonight. I also understand. I've been told that no one will be disappointed if I don't use the full hour. So I will be as fast as you want me to be. So we're going to start.
So I'm good.
I am going to start with the role of the school committee. So when we're talking about the role of the school committee, we have to talk about the Education Reform Act of 1993. So that act reformed the way that schools are controlled in Massachusetts. Prior to ed reform, schools were controlled almost exclusively by school committees. And under ed reform, the control of schools or the authority over schools was split between the site-based administrators, being the principals and the superintendent, and the school committee. School committees were given a more overarching authority, policy, budget, hiring and firing and evaluating the superintendent. And then principals and superintendents were given operational site-based authority that would include student discipline, employee evaluations, obviously the instruction of students, but the day-to-day management and control of school buildings, all of that was placed in the control of superintendents and principals. I have included throughout this presentation some references to your own policies. So in policy BBA, you basically mirrored that what the state statutes say about what authorities are under school committee control, policymaking and review, budgetary, public relations, educational planning, and appointment of the superintendent. And there are certain other district level positions that the school committee appoints as well. So on educational goals and policy, that includes looking at what the statewide educational requirements are and implementing educational or adopting educational curriculum that implements those requirements. You have a policy manual, section I, that has a lot of policies in it, but generally speaking, that's your policy manual section that talks about educational curriculum and implementation. The school committee has the general charge and superintendence of school buildings, meaning that they are under your care, custody, and control on a day-to-day basis. That's under the control of the superintendent and your building principals. School committees also define start and end times of the school day, school calendar, and staff evaluation systems and performance standards. School committee also approves budgets. You have line item authority over your own budget. That means that you adopt an overall budget which is voted up or down by town meeting. If it's not approved at the number that you requested, it is not approved. If it's and town meeting can't tell you how to spend money within your budget. You are required to have a budget hearing, and you have a policy manual, section D, that addresses fiscal management. On hiring and contracting with certain personnel. So as I mentioned, you have appointment authority over superintendents. There are also some quirky statutes about other personnel in school districts. That includes assistant superintendents, who you actually appoint upon the recommendation of the superintendent. So typically, you let your superintendent choose their own staff, but technically under the statute, it's the school committee that appoints them. School business manager, special education administrator, school physician, supervisor of attendance, and legal counsel. All of those are appointed by school committees. You also establish compensation parameters. You have budgetary authority within the school district, and you can set parameters for benefits and compensation for various positions throughout the district. You also have a role in collective bargaining. You are the employer for purposes of Chapter 150E for your unionized employees in Massachusetts, in Concord and in Concord, Carlisle. And then I've included there, again, these are sort of broad roles, and so I just included references to the entire section H, entire section B, and entire section C, where you address various things under your authority. One thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about school committee authority is that no individual member of a school committee has any special authority. School committees act as a whole. The only way a school committee can act is through a vote of its members. So no individual member has any kind of special authority by virtue of their public office, unless that authority is delegated to them by vote of the school committee. Obviously, each of your committees chooses a chair. That gives them some sort of special authority in terms of running meetings, but it doesn't give them any kind of special authority over the school district. The committee as a whole continues to hold its authority. That also means that individual school committee members have no special right to access information or to take any kind of action to distribute information on behalf of the school committee. That only happens when the school committee votes to direct somebody to take that kind of action. You have a policy, BBA. Again, it mirrors what it says in state law about what school committee members' authority is. And I included it below policy BBA, some selected duties from that policy. Become familiar with relevant laws. You're expected to work effectively with the rest of your committee and administrators, respect confidentiality and privilege, and to represent your school districts in a positive manner and act for the good of the schools. All right, so we're going to compare that to your school administrator authority. So ed reform gave site-based management and control to superintendents and principals. So at a school level, principals are in charge of their schools, and at a district level, the superintendent is in charge of the district. That includes selecting textbooks and educational materials, personnel matters, student matters. That includes education, discipline, service delivery, evaluation. All of those things fall under your school administrators. Again, I've gone through your policy manuals and reviewed what policies you have that relate to the roles of the school administrators and school committees. Policy BDD talks about the relationship between the school committee and the superintendent. And again, it confirms what we already know from state law about the respective roles of the school committee and the superintendent. The policy does expect that the superintendent will make recommendations to the committee on matters that fall under the committee's authority or seek guidance from the committee on policy matters that the superintendent is expected to implement. And it also expects that the superintendent will keep the committee adequately informed for committee business. Now, I think we're going to get into more tonight about what it would mean to be adequately informed in order to complete committee business, because that does not necessarily mean that the superintendent is sharing all of the information that the superintendent has based upon their role as superintendent, meaning individual student information or individual personnel information with the committee, but providing enough information that the committee can act on matters in its jurisdiction. Policy CA is your administration goals policy, where the committee has adopted a set of goals for administration. That policy also recognizes, though, that the committee has, that the personnel that the committee has chosen to employ are expected to be qualified for their position and to handle their role in a professional manner. Policy CA is intended to basically balance the responsibility that the committee and the superintendent have with their commensurate authority. and ensure that everyone is given adequate authority to complete their role in the district. You've also got policy CB, which talks about your school superintendent and the expectations that the committee has for how they are going to fill their role. That includes implementing committee policy, of course, and preparing and submitting required reports that both to the state and to the committee. Policy CCB is about staff relations. So as we're discussing the respective roles of the committee and the superintendent, I indicated that superintendents have site-based authority and they have control over individual personnel matters. That does not necessarily mean that committee members will never speak to individual staff members, and staff members may want to come speak to the school committee. But in general, the responsibility for interacting with individual personnel and for handling individual personnel matters falls to the superintendent and to the building principals. You have a policy CCB, which indicates that the committee has adopted a policy that if a matter that requires an administrative action is brought to them, it's going to be referred to the appropriate administrator. And that if there's a disagreement when that matter is referred to the appropriate administrator, that there are established procedures for how those disagreements are resolved at a building-based level. So your policy CCB basically refers individual staff back to the proper administrator rather than having matters that are individual personnel matters addressed at a committee level. You also have several policies that confirm that there is site-based responsibility for students. Policy JCA talks about the assignment of students to individual schools. Policy JIC talks about student discipline. And policy JII talks about student complaints and grievances. I included those for your reference. I didn't think that it was a good use of time to go in depth into those policies, but they're there if you want to go back and look at those policies in your manual. Policy BHC is school committee staff communications. So again, staff members may bring concerns to you, and your expectation under your committee policy is to refer them back to the appropriate administrator. There may also be times when the school committee wants to talk to staff members. Policy BHC indicates that communications between the school committee and administration or staff should go through the superintendent. So the school committee has defined its policy to say, when the school committee wants to communicate with staff, we are going to do that through the superintendent. That's the appropriate channel. There is an exception listed in your policy, and that would be appeals that fall under the committee's authority. That may be, for example, a union grievance that comes up to a committee level if it's appropriately before the committee. In terms of issuing directives to staff, generally speaking, the committee does not have a role to issue directives to staff. Your superintendent is your appointing authority for most employees, and school committee members and the school committee as a whole don't issue directives to staff. That is something that is defined well within the law as modified by ed reform. When you get inquiries or requests for, this is if the committee wants to request information from staff, just remember that the committee does not necessarily have any greater right than a general member of the public to get information from staff. Again, that communication should go to the superintendent, and you should request the information of the superintendent. The superintendent will determine where to get that information from in order to provide it to you. Generally speaking, if the committee wants to seek information from the superintendent, the appropriate channel is for the committee to vote, the chair to then communicate that vote to the superintendent, and then the superintendent and the chair to exchange that information. All right, so in terms of what information you can receive as school committee members, you can of course get any kind of public documents that the school has. Those are public documents. So anybody in the public can request documents like employment contracts, the superintendent evaluation, which happens in open session. Those types of documents are commonly requested, and they are public documents. If there are other public documents related to the budget, staffing levels, things that exist within the district and that you think are relevant to school committee business, those can be requested from district administration. But it's important to remember that you don't have a right to access any kind of confidential information about individual employees or individual students. So I will go into a little more detail about what it means to be confidential information or private information about personnel or individual students. But generally speaking, that's going to be any matter that involves an individual's discipline, whether it's a student or an employee, an evaluation material for a employee, student record material, which can include things like academic records, attendance records for students, basically any record that directly relates to an individual student and is in possession of the school district can be considered a student record. There may be specific need-to-know exceptions where information is provided about an individual is provided to the school committee. Typically that comes up when there are security concerns, when there is litigation, or there's a matter where the school committee needs to act on a matter that involves an individual student or an individual employee. And you're provided just as I indicated before, you're adequately informed, you're provided just enough information in order to be able to act on that matter. The information would remain confidential and privileged. It wouldn't be able to be shared outside of the information being provided to the school committee, but it may be provided to you in order for the school committee, if you're being requested to act on some particular matter.
Is there a purpose under executive session for that kind of information to be shared?
There is no general executive session purpose for the sharing of private information.
Or in the case where there's, shared with the public, but shared among the committee in executive session about an item like you just described?
So if there were an individual personnel matter that the school committee needed to address, purpose one talks about complaints against an individual or to consider the discipline or dismissal of an individual. If that matter was coming before the school committee would be provided enough information to make a decision under that purpose.
Under executive session?
If there were litigation, purpose three relates to strategy with respect to litigation. If there was a lawsuit against one of the districts, and the school committee needed to make a determination about what to do with the lawsuit, whether to settle it, how to respond, just a general discussion of, what the exposure might be. You might be provided additional information under purpose three, and it would be an executive session, it would be privileged. But it would be because of the nature of the information that's being shared, not just because we consider it private or confidential, but because there's a specific purpose that applies to the matter.
Okay. So under those conditions, you have the executive session to get that information for that purpose.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So I am gonna take a drink, but the next topic that this kind of leads into is public records and privacy. So I thought I would just include a slide. What are public records? Public record is any record that's made or received by a public employee. It doesn't matter what kind of record it is, if it is a document or if it's in writing, if it's a digital document, it is generally presumed to be a public record, and it would be produced unless it is exempt from disclosure. When we're talking about public records, and I think this comes up often for elected officials, that may include a record on your private accounts. So if you are conducting public business on a private email account or on a private phone, one of those records could be a public record if it's public business. So if you are communicating, exclusively with the superintendent about a policy matter that is before the committee, and you're doing it on your personal cell phone and you're just texting, that text message could be a public record. The content of it may make it exempt, but the location of it on your personal device does not necessarily mean that it's a personal record. So it's always good to be cautious and careful when you're thinking about public records and you're thinking about communicating with your fellow members that you're using school accounts, you're using school devices to communicate, because that way, if there's a request for communications, between the school committee about a policy matter, then the IT can conduct a search for that. We don't have to reach out to you and say, hey, do you have any of this stuff on your personal account? We know that all of those records exist on our systems. You don't have to worry about records retention and whether you're keeping records long enough. If you do everything, all of your public business on a public account, all of that's going to be handled for you by the school standard practices. That said, the people sitting in this room may text each other about personal business. You know, how is your procedure? You know, happy birthday, things like that. Those don't relate to public business. We're not going to be releasing those to the public. Those are personal messages between public officials, but they're not about public business. Those are your personal records that we're never going to be releasing to the public. The other thing that are not public records is personal knowledge that you have, records that don't exist. So the public records law applies only to things that exist, have been created, which means they've been made or received by a public entity. It doesn't apply to knowledge you have, you don't have to answer questions, and you don't have to create a record in response to a request. But it's just important to remember that, you know, if something is put in writing, then there's going to be a decision that has to be made about whether it's a public record and whether it's exempt. So I've already kind of covered this slide, but just to reiterate, all communications that are in writing may be public records. That includes any records sent to or from public officials. So, you know, I think we're on Zoom. If there are members of the public who are watching this and they send something to a public official, they should know that that record may be a public record unless in our possession we've determined that some of the information in it is exempt. So a lot of public officials have disclaimers at the bottom of their accounts that say all the supervisor of records has determined that all records or all emails are public records. And that's a good warning to people. You're communicating with me, I'm a public official. Just know that once this is received by the school district, this may be a public record and it may have to be released in response to a public records request.
We do have school email addresses, by the way, that have the disclaimer at the bottom.
And
But still, you're saying private, you're saying email, text messages. I just have a question about scheduling. Like sometimes it is easier to schedule a meeting with a member or two members, not a quorum, through text. Is that okay?
so you can schedule a meeting with a quorum.
Meeting
through text.
scheduling, yeah.
But because it's not a discussion of a matter under the jurisdiction of, it's considered a ministerial matter that's
Okay.
not a deliberation on public records law. But you can do that via text. Although it is not a deliberation, even if it's among a quorum, it could be a public record. So if you're saying, I am not available because I have that procedure that day, we would probably not release the reason why. If someone requested their all records related to the scheduling of the January 21st, 2026 meeting, we wouldn't release that someone had a procedure. That's medical information. That's nobody's business.
Right.
But the actual scheduling, I don't know why somebody would want it, but it may be a public record. It is about scheduling this meeting. It's about public business between or among public officials. And I just don't think that there's an exemption that would apply. So some of the things that do, in terms of records being exempt, whenever we get a request for public records, we look at the record itself to say, what is contained within the record? Okay, we have a record that exists. It's in our possession. Someone's requested it. Now we have to look at this and say, is there information in this that is not public, that's exempt from disclosure under the public records law? So there are some common exceptions that come up, or exemptions rather, that come up when school districts get requests for records. That includes records that are confidential by law. So that's things like attorney-client privileged communications. Supervisor of records has recognized that those are privileged by law and those do not have to be disclosed under Exemption A. Student or education records, those are confidential under state and federal law. Those are records that relate to an individual student that is identifiable, whether by name or by context or by other information that's publicly available. That includes executive session minutes or materials. Those are exempt under those are privileged under the open meeting law, and there's specific language in the open meeting law that says that executive session minutes and materials are not public records. Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about what by context means? Because you said identified by name or by context. And give an example.
I can.
Or is that coming up?
It's coming up, but let me just. So the rule for student records is that any record that directly relates to a student and is in the possession of a school district is generally considered a public record, or excuse me, considered a student record. That record would be confidential. So then the question is, well, what does it mean to directly relate to a student? If it relates to a student's education, let's say we have a record that says, John Smith got an A in math class. That record may be able to be redacted to remove John Smith. And then you wouldn't know who got an A in math class unless you had specifically requested records relating to John Smith, in which case no amount of redaction could remove who the identity of the student who's being talked about is. So if the identity of the student to whom the record relates is known to the requester or to the public, then the record can't be released even with redaction because everybody would just be able to fill in who the record relates to. When we're talking about by context, if you are talking about, well, I guess the context would be, well, what if there are 2 students in the math class? And someone says, I want to know the grades of the students in the math class. Well, the context is, I know that in this particular academic class, there are only 2 students, so I can make a pretty good guess about who this student who got an A is. Or if both students got an A, then obviously you know what both of their grades were. That can also come up when there's an incident at the school and people may know who was involved in the incident. Well, someone may request all records related to that incident. And then we have to go through those records and say, okay, but even if we release, this student was disciplined or this student was hurt or this student was a witness, if people know who was involved in that, then the context of the matter allows them to identify the student. And so it's actually more complicated than you would think when you're talking about student record information, because we have to be very careful. We are required by law to maintain the confidentiality of these records. So we have to be very careful that we're not releasing anything that's going to release a student's confidential information to the public, directly or indirectly through identification through other sources.
Okay.
Good.
In the setting where you're trying to glean information on groups of students or classes of students, and the numbers are small.
Yeah.
And is there a mechanism under which that can be done? Where you're in a population of hundreds of students, you're looking at subsets that can be just double digits.
So DESI has a standard that it does not for student
Less
arrest.
than 10, I think.
For student arrest data, it is 6 or fewer, I believe. And I generally look to DESI and see what there are different contexts and different types of information. They may use that 10
I was
standard.
thinking academic data.
Yeah. So sometimes aggregate data can be released where it relates to if you want to know like what was the average grade in 4th grade last year. If there were 100 students in 4th grade last year, releasing the average grade. If that information exists already, let's say it's a B, it doesn't release information that's directly related to any particular student. You don't know who got a B. That's maybe not a good example, but
I'll paint a scenario looking at low-income special need and ethnic breakdown of students and in grades in English language arts or math, where the numbers are small. I can understand where by context would apply. The question is if for the purpose of assessing academic performance and how you're meeting the needs of those students, is there a way for the assessing body to look at that information, appropriately anonymized or not? Is there a way for that to take place? I know in that setting, DESI's number I think is 10.
So you're in terms of assessing academic performance, your school-based administrators they have access to that information and they can view it and they can determine how the academic performance is and whether they're meeting the needs of individual students. For a school committee, we would be very careful not to release, even for a school committee, we treat you like a member of the public, we would be very careful not to release student record information. So if if the combination of characteristics or even the individual characteristics narrowed the subset of students down so far that you would be able to identify the particular student in fourth grade that had a particular grade or a particular discipline or was on an IEP or something like that, it's unlikely that that information would be able to be released beyond the people who have access to the student record under the student records law. So it's, in most cases, if a student can be identified, the information can't be released. But if there's aggregate information where it's broad enough, it's possible that information can be released. But again, under the public records law, if we're talking about the public records law, the question would be whether that document already exists if someone requested it.
Thank you.
All right, so there's also a personnel and medical information exemption that comes up often. You know, people want to request records related to individual employees, and then there's an other private information exemption. So both of those fall under exemption C, and they're treated a little bit differently under the law. Personnel and medical information, there are specific types of things that constitute medical information or that constitute personnel information. Those are considered absolutely exempt from disclosure under the public records law. There are Supreme Judicial Court cases about that. And then there's other private information, which requires a balancing test. Is the information available from other sources? Would an individual of normal sensibilities be embarrassed by the disclosure of this information? And is it personal and private to them? So that balancing test is applied to other private information. I've seen articles and stats that say that is the most commonly cited exemption in Massachusetts, the other private information exemption. When we're talking about student records, when we're looking at whether to release information, it's not only confidential by law, but it's also private. So we may also cite, this is a student record, but it's also private information. So we're not going to release it publicly because it relates to an individual student. They don't want their grades known publicly. And so those are the common exemptions that come up.
And typically you're involved in that process.
Yes.
Whether to determine if something is able to be released, I mean, it is, the school attorneys are involved in that.
Yes. I often am in communication with your records access officer, with your superintendent, about what information is exempt and what information is not exempt. There are some requests that don't require, I hesitated, there are some requests that don't require council involvement. Those are what we call the easy requests. Yes, we know what that document is. Yes, we know there's no exempt information in it. But I would say throughout the state, it's not unique to Concord.
No, right.
I am on a daily basis talking to people about, this is what this exemption means. You got to look at the record, what's in it, and carefully go through the information to determine whether there are exemptions that apply. And when we're doing that, we're looking at individual pieces of information in the record. So a student record that is not necessarily exempt in its entirety. And I say that because, and there's a case that's going to be listed in one of the slides coming up, Champa versus Weston Public Schools. So Champa versus Weston Public Schools, I'm just going to talk about it now and then I'll skip it later, was a case in which a requester, Champa, I believe, made a request to the Weston Public Schools for all settlement agreements for the past 10 years for students on IEPs. And so those are cases where there's a dispute between parents and the school district about the proper educational services for a student who requires an IEP, and the parties reach an agreement to say this is how the student's going to be educated going forward. Weston said those are student records and we're not giving those up. And there was an appeal and it went all the way to the Supreme Judicial Court. And the SJC said, actually what you can do is redact those records so much that no student could possibly be identified in them. So you redact the student's name, all of their identifying characteristics, and leave in basically the boilerplate of the agreement, the generic terms, things that can't be traced back to an individual student, and then you can release what's left in the settlement agreement. So when I say exemptions apply to information, not necessarily entire records, what the SJC was saying is redact all of the student record information from those records and leave what's left, can't be traced to an individual student, and so that is considered what's left after redaction is not considered a student record. That is a very time-intensive process, though, because if you've got 1,000 pages of documents, you have to go through every single page, particularly with student records. You have to think about the context. You have to think about other characteristics, what other information is publicly available when you're making those redactions, and make sure you haven't released anything that would allow, particularly with 1,000 pages that typically that's going to relate to 1 or 2 students. It's like, well, if the student's identifiable from 1 page, the whole release may be identifiable. So it's a really deliberate and time-intensive process that we go through. Those types of things I'm almost always involved in, or my office, a school attorney is almost always involved in reviewing and advising folks on this information needs to be redacted further, or this is what to redact. Okay. So there's Champa, and the question is that I put in here for Champa, and I posed it 2 different ways, is there still a risk of indirect identification of the student despite redaction, or can the student be identified through other available information, again, despite redaction? But I listed in here common types of student and education records, and I put student/education records because under Massachusetts law, they're called student records, and under federal law, they're called education records, but we're talking about the same thing. I think I've pretty much covered. Yeah, I mean, these are just common types of student records. Attendance records, discipline records, grades, those are things you would think of typically. Investigation materials may reveal information about a student's education. They're directly related to the student. So an investigation into a disciplinary incident may be a student record. Pictures or videos, typically we think of student records as something that's written, but pictures of a student in relation to their education and that are held by the school district, and videos can be student records, schoolwork, of course, and then email communications. That's one of the requests we see more and more often now from parents, is to say, I'd like to see all emails related to my child. And we generally consider those to be student records because a lot of them are talking about what the student, or like there was a disciplinary incident, there's oftentimes an email about it. So that can be student communications if your students have email addresses. That can be communications between the parent and the student, or communications between staff about a student. All of those can be student records. Okay. So the basic thing to remember here is that student records are confidential if they directly relate to an identifiable student and they're maintained by the school district. It's a simple test, but it applies pretty broadly to any record that relates to a student. So when we get requests and we see that it relates to a student, we assume that it's a student record unless there's reason to believe it's not a student record. These are just some citations to the laws that apply that confirm that student records are confidential. So as I mentioned, there's federal law, that's FERPA. There's the IDEA, so students who are on special education their information may be protected under the IDEA. Massachusetts law, Chapter 71, Section 34D and 34E. That is, those are a couple statutes that talk about student records, and basically they tell the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to issue regulations and further define it, and that's a citation to those regulations. The other things to think about for student records confidentiality is actually that there is a privacy statute in Massachusetts, and individuals have a right to privacy. That would apply to employees and students, but there's also a constitutional liberty interest when the government is talking about an individual or releasing information about an individual. It may impact that person's constitutional liberty interest, meaning that they have a right to clear their name. So those are the types of things we think about when we're talking about student records confidentiality. All right, so in terms of disclosing student records, as I mentioned earlier, school administrators and teachers may have access to student records, but they only access student records to the extent that's needed for their job. So a teacher in Concord Public Schools does not necessarily have access to every single student's student record information. The superintendent, being at the top rung of the operational hierarchy in the school district, is likely going to have access to most students' information if the superintendent needs to get involved in an individual student matter. Building principals obviously have access to information about students in their building. They're not accessing information about students in other buildings. But outside of that internal hierarchy, superintendent, building principals, staff, and down, or I guess that's as far down as it goes, but the information is not disclosed beyond that. So again, the school committee, although you are school officials and your responsibility is to the school district and to do what's best for the students, there's nothing in the law that allows you access to individual student records. And that's because you don't need that information in order to do your job. There's nothing that you provide directly to individual students that would authorize you to access that student record information. Generally speaking, outside of those school employees who have a need to know individual student record information, a parent can get student record information, and no third parties can get student record information unless a parent has authorized it. So there are limited exceptions for health and safety. If we get a subpoena or a court order, we may release student record information in compliance with that. Generally speaking, we're doing everything we can to maintain the confidentiality of student record information at the lowest level possible. And the federal law is enforced by the Department of Education, what's left of it, and the state laws are enforced by DESE. There's no private right of action for breaches of student record information confidentiality, but a parent can request that either of those agencies investigate and enforce those laws. All right, the next one is personnel records. Similar to student records, the school committee doesn't appoint individual personnel for the most part. And for that reason, you don't have access to their personnel files. That access is limited to, again, people in the district who need to know. People with appointing authority, maybe the superintendent, you have a human resources director, and that information is maintained confidentially in the school district. As I mentioned, personnel record information is absolutely exempt from disclosure, as well as medical information. That is information that directly or indirectly identifies a individual employee. And typically speaking, when we're talking about personnel information, that's information that is useful in making employment decisions. So that's their employment application, which would include their resume, and the materials and the information they submit on their employment application. That would include their evaluations of their performance. That would include any kind of disciplinary documentation, suspension, termination, demotion, promotion. All of that information is useful in making employment decisions, and it is considered personnel information that's absolutely exempt from disclosure. Things that are related to staff but are not considered personnel information include things like salary, dates of employment, positions held, employment status, and public contact information. So the supervisor of records says that is not personally related to individual employees, and as a result, it's public information. It is important for the public to know what position a public employee holds and how long they've held that position and how much they're making. So all of that information may be public. All right, other private records, as I mentioned earlier, there's a balancing test when you're talking about other private records. Other private records are basically anything that you would typically think of as private. So that's your personal contact information. That includes your marital status, whether you're receiving government assistance, social security numbers, family status, medical information. Your information about your reputation can also be exempt from disclosure under Exemption C. So again, it's the type of information that if the school committee is looking for information about individual employees, you're treated like other members of the public, and so you may not be able to access all of the information you want to access, even if it exists within the school's documents. All right, so I spent a lot of time talking about exemptions that you guys don't typically apply, and part of that was just to tell you, when you receive a public records request, it's important that you just send it to the records access officer. So Massachusetts has set up a system where every city and town has a records access officer. And for schools, most schools have a specifically designated records access officer. When a public records request comes in, the school district has 10 business days to respond, so it's important that you forward that request immediately to the records access officer to give them as much time as possible to think about what records exist, how to conduct a search, whether there's exempt information, and provide a response to the requester. You can respond to the requester acknowledging the request, and I often recommend that you do. Yes, I received your request, and I forwarded it to the appropriate person. But what I try to advise school committees not to do is to try to provide the information themselves. So if you get a public records request, you're not going to necessarily be aware of every possible exemption of all of the information that exists. We want to respond completely and we want to respond correctly when we respond to a requester. So I recommend that you acknowledge the request and you forward it on to the correct person, unless it is pointing them to a document on the website. Generally speaking, I recommend you send the request to the records access officer to let them respond on behalf of the district. And then if the records access officer says you have information that I need, again, if someone requests your personal text messages, we may reach out and say, do you have text messages about this matter? If so, can you provide a screenshot so that we can determine whether or not it's exempt? It's important as school officials that you cooperate with the records access officer if they reach out to you asking if you have any public records in your possession. All right. Again, we could spend 2 hours talking about the open meeting law. I'm already 45 minutes in,
Which
so.
we're really not gonna do, right, Peter?
I'll stay all night if you want me to, but
I should go back to that last one. Receiving these requests, these have to be written, electronic, or
so yes and no. If someone was here and they said, hi, Lori, or hi, Bob, could you give me a copy of that document? That's technically a public records request, but it's not appealable. It has to be in writing to be appealable. So if it was ignored, technically speaking, the person couldn't appeal the lack of response. So that's why I say yes and no. Any request can be a public records request, but in order for someone to complain about it, they have to put it in writing and get a written response or not get a response. All right, so very, very basic stuff about the open meeting law. Just remember that all meetings of a public body are open to the public unless a valid reason for executive session exists. I'm more interested in talking about executive sessions here, but I included this information. I've given you guys copies. You can refer to what does and does not constitute a deliberation under the public records law. As I mentioned, scheduling a meeting does not constitute a deliberation. Distributing meeting materials, you all may receive a copy of materials that are going to be discussed at the meeting in advance. That's not considered a deliberation as long as someone's not introducing a new opinion or expressing a new opinion in those materials. So if there are materials that you've created, if you've written a long statement that you want to present at a school committee meeting and you're anticipating that's going to happen, sharing it in advance of the meeting actually can be a deliberation under the open meeting law because you are providing your opinion to members outside of the duly posted meeting. So if these are materials that exist, if they're created by district administration, you're saying we're going to be discussing the budget, here's the budget document for the next meeting, that is not a meeting. But if it is someone saying this is what I think about the budget and this is what I'm going to say tonight, just be careful. I just wait and say it at the meeting and then you can share the written copy with members. Going to a birthday party, going to town meeting actually is not considered a meeting under the open meeting law. I always thought that was interesting, but you're considered town meeting members when you're attending town meeting. You're not considered members of your boards. The agenda for a meeting has to be posted 48 hours in advance. That excludes Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays. You can hold emergency meetings with less than 48 hours notice. You're supposed to still post notice as soon as possible. Generally speaking, if you call me and say, we have an emergency, I'm probably going to tell you it's not an emergency and that you may want to address it sooner, but it actually has to wait 48 hours. Emergencies are things that truly cannot wait to be addressed with 48 hours notice. The things that belong on the agenda are the date, time, and place of the meeting and what's going to be discussed at the meeting. There are some other technical requirements like the time and date it's posted, but this is the information that I think you need about what goes on an agenda.
Can I ask you something? Can I interrupt for a second on the emergency meeting situation? Because I have asked Michelle that same question. She's like, it's not an emergency. But like, say, I'm gonna use another district's example. Framingham, they had 4 buses go on fire, so they have no transportation for their kids to get to school. Would that constitute an emergency?
And you need
Like some type of
transportation on
disaster,
Monday?
you needed
Yes.
to set up transportation and, figure out if you had money, that would constitute emergency.
Yes.
But short of that,
It's, so, if Framingham's buses had caught on fire last Monday, and then they didn't realize that they weren't gonna have buses for this Monday, or if they caught fire a week in advance and they just sort of delayed and it was their fault
Yeah.
that they didn't address it, then it wouldn't be considered an emergency. It would have just been, sort of a lack of preparation on their part. But if they catch fire on Friday and you need buses for Monday, it's an emergency because you have to do something to get those buses
Right.
rented or purchased or
if it required
Obtained.
action by the school committee.
if it required action by the school committee.
Okay,
Just
so
to be
it's fine.
informed of something wouldn't be an emergency where you would
Right.
have to meet. That could wait. Or it could be done, by email from the superintendent. This is the information.
Like, this is what happened, right?
Yes.
Anything that needs a vote of the school committee, but it would have to be like a catastrophic emergency. To constitute an emergency.
Catastrophic, not necessarily. It's a
Sorry.
sudden, generally unexpected occurrence.
Okay.
But it demands immediate action, something that requires action before 48 hours.
Okay.
Just don't get confused, because if you have a meeting posted and a matter comes up after it's posted before the meeting, even if it's less than 48 hours beforehand, you can amend the agenda. It does not have to be an emergency. So posting a new meeting with less than 48 hours requires an emergency.
It would be super rare.
I don't think I've
I've-
done it in 26 years.
I represent a
He's
lot of
not
districts
one.
and I've only done it
So, yeah.
3 or 4 times
Okay.
in the
Okay,
past 10 years.
that's
So,
helpful. All right, thanks.
All right, and the chair sets the agenda for the matters that are gonna be discussed at the meeting. The open meeting law places the onus on the chair to make sure that the agenda is properly posted for the committee, and to ensure that when matters come up at a school committee meeting, they are in fact on the agenda, and if they're not, to rule somebody out of order and say, that's not on the agenda, we can't talk about that tonight. All right. So I went forward, right? Yeah, okay. The most common executive session purposes for school committees are purpose 1, to discuss an individual, so that's the complaint, discipline, that type of stuff that we were talking about earlier. It is not to evaluate an individual, so you can't perform the superintendent's evaluation under purpose 1 in executive session. That happens in open session. Purpose 2 is for non-union contract negotiations, strategy with respect to non-union contract negotiations, and for actual collective bargaining sessions under purpose 2. Purpose 3 is for strategy with respect to collective bargaining and strategy with respect to litigation. So if you have a lawsuit against Concord School Committee or Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee, we might send you into executive session under purpose 3 to advise you of what the status of that is. But the discussion in those executive sessions has to stay on topic. It has to stay limited to the purpose for which the executive session is called. So if we are talking about bargaining strategy, actually, if we're talking about, if we're under purpose 2, we're talking about strategy with respect to contract negotiations. And we're talking about negotiating Lori Hunter's contract. And, how much, does the school committee want to pay, whatever it may be. And someone says, I'd really like to talk about this complaint that came in and what kind of discipline we should impose. Well, that goes beyond the scope, because you're no longer talking about the contract with the superintendent. You're talking about discipline, which is not a strategy with respect to contract negotiation, and it should have been posted under purpose 1. And there are certain notice requirements. Now, Lori's not in trouble, so you guys aren't gonna have to worry about that, but I just use that for an example. Purpose 4 is to discuss the deployment of security personnel or devices. Purpose 7, you guys probably use often for approving executive session minutes. It is for certain laws that require a school committee to act and to meet in executive session to discuss them. Because the information that they're going to be discussing is confidential or privileged. Purpose 8 is actually only for subcommittees. It is not for the full committee to use, but it's for preliminary screening committees who are evaluating candidates for employment. As I mentioned earlier, there's no general privacy exemption. You may have information that you want to discuss that you generally consider private. You don't like somebody, you're upset by something, but unless it falls under one of the purposes, it can't be discussed in executive session. Just like for open sessions, executive session minutes have to be created and approved in a timely manner. And then those minutes and all the materials that are used and all the discussions that occur in executive session remain privileged. The committee holds the privilege. So as I mentioned earlier, none of you individually have any kind of special rights or authority by virtue of your public office. The committee holds the privilege for its attorney-client privilege, for its executive session privilege. And so if something happens in executive session, something's just given to you in executive session, or you've reviewed something in executive session, you have an obligation as a committee member, a fiduciary duty to the school district, not to release that information until the committee has decided this information is no longer privileged, or this information is no longer confidential and we can release it to the public. That happens by a majority vote, just like everything else for a school committee action. All right, I have a few more minutes. I did not end early, but I'm going to try to go through quickly school committee member responsibilities. So you have a policy, actually, policy B. Oh, go ahead, yes.
So
Do you want to go back?
no, just a question. When I took charge of the course, it said there were 10 purposes for executive session. I only saw 8.
Yeah.
What happened to the other 2?
Well, you may need them. So there's one for real estate. That's purpose 6. There's one for filing a criminal complaint. That's purpose 5. Purpose 9 is, I believe, something to do with mediation. They're just much less common. This was just intended to be the most common purposes.
Thank you.
If there were a quiz, I wouldn't have gotten all 10, but they're in the.
I won't get in.
That's why I'm relying on 9 out of 10.
They're in section 21 though. Their references in there. All right, these are your own policies. I'm not going to read them to you. I'm going to try to finish on time. But generally speaking, you have, MASC has put out a member handbook, and that may be the charting the course.
It's part of
Yeah,
it.
So they have a handbook that they distribute to people in the charting the course program. You've actually adopted, I think, pretty much word for word, the code of ethics that MASC has put out for school committee members, and you've adopted it as policy BCA. Again, I included it in here. I'm not going to read it to you, but generally speaking, you have 3 different sections of your responsibilities as school committee members. You've listed it as your responsibility to the community, which talks about things about your representation of the entire community. I know you all have interests and things that you feel very passionate about, but at all times you represent the entire school community. That your job here is basically to do work. Like this is not a place to play politics or to have fun. You volunteered to do this work. You ran for the office, and now you're stuck with all of the work that goes along with it. And you're supposed to work on behalf of the community. It also says you have a responsibility to administration, which is basically even when you butt heads with administration, you should endeavor to establish sound, clearly defined policies and support administration, and to respect the chain of command. And then you have responsibility to one another, and that is to recognize that your actions at these meetings are binding and that you can't bind the committee by yourself. So again, committee acts as a whole. You're just one part of a larger committee. Something I meant to talk about earlier and was on an earlier slide is just this: realize that statements or promises should not be made regarding how they will vote upon matters that will come before the committee. Kind of goes into a topic which is that you need to be careful when you're talking to members of the public to ensure that they know that if you're talking on your own behalf or on behalf of the committee. So if you have not been authorized by the committee to speak on the committee's behalf, you just have to know that when you're out there speaking to the community, whether it's on social media, direct conversations, you want people to know that it's your personal communication with them. You're not speaking on behalf of the committee. You're not conveying a message on behalf of the committee. A lot of times people, if they're coming up to you as a school committee member to talk to you, their perception is that you are the committee. So you just want to be careful to say, this is, I'm not speaking for the committee. This is me, or however you want to say it. But that's something I highly recommend. And you're also supposed to keep an open mind until you actually vote on matters that are before the committee. Just quickly, you have a policy regarding conflict of interest, and it's also governed by state law. That's again, another 2-hour presentation for you. But I'll just note that you can get free and confidential advice from the State Ethics Commission. You call them, they have an attorney of the day, and you say, this is the situation. You do it before you act, and they'll say you can or you cannot do that, or if you can do it, but there are certain things like a disclosure you need to make, here's how you do it. They can put it in writing for you, it's free, it's confidential to you, you never have to tell anybody that you called them if you don't want to. But if someone says, that's a conflict of interest, you could say, actually, I did call them and I did get advice and I followed that advice exactly. I always recommend that committee members, if they have a question about a conflict of interest, that be their first call.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Just in terms of special municipal employees. So I was told that if you're in the regional school committee, you have to be a special municipal employee in both towns. We are in Concord and it's stated, but in Carlisle, it's unclear. Can you get that information if we're considered special municipal employees in Carlisle?
I can. Sometimes it's automatic.
Okay, it was weird, yeah.
Yeah, so if you can send me the question
Okay,
in
Okay.
writing, I'll look
Yep.
into it. I'm just gonna skip ahead a couple slides. I think that you guys generally understand that you're subject to the conflict of interest law. I included some examples in there of things that often come up for school committee members. And I've got a link at the end of this presentation to a guidance from the State Ethics Commission that is specifically guidance for school committee members and common conflicts of interest that come up for them. But whether it's conflicts of interest or others, we try to give you a visual of, you're acting as a school committee member. We say, put on your school committee member hat. And just remember, while you're wearing that hat, you have an obligation to the school committee, or to the school district, rather. Your obligation, you're elected by the community, you're here to serve them, but your fiduciary duty is to the school district. And so that means you have to maintain the privilege, you have to be careful not to violate the open meeting law, be careful not to create any kind of exposure for the school district in your actions. And generally speaking, you just want to act in the best interest of the schools, because the schools are here to serve the students. So if you're acting in the best interest of the schools, you're acting in the best interest of the students, and that is in the best interest of the community. So I always just say, try to think of, I'm going to put on my school committee hat, I'm going to a school committee meeting, tonight I'm going to act as a school committee member. Or if I'm going out to public and I'm holding office hours and talking to members of the public as a committee member, I'm putting on my school committee hat. And if I want to make a personal statement, I'm taking that hat off, and I'm going to be very clear to people that my school committee member hat is off. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. This is not on behalf of the school committee. I believe that is it. So these are the resources. As I mentioned, there's a State Ethics Commission conflict of interest law explanation there. There's a few other things, open meeting law guide, public records guide, a DESI advisory on school governance, which talks about the roles of the school committee versus the roles of administration. And then the Inspector General's office actually has a guidance for members of public boards and commissions that talks about fiduciary duty and your obligation to the board and the entity that you serve. That is all. Was there anything that you thought of that I skipped right over you wanted to ask a question about?
Anyone?
Pretty thorough.
This is very helpful, thank you.
It's actually super helpful, and I'm someone that I like to go charting the course. But it actually, like now, like you're in the middle of the school year, it's a good time to do it, because sometimes we think about doing trainings over the summer, and sometimes you're not quite in that frame of mind yet, so halfway through we figured put another training in here. And maybe if something comes up after this that people want or are interested in, we could do another workshop over the summer. And just kind of keep in a cadence of just reviewing policies, et cetera, so.
Absolutely, yeah. As I mentioned, some of those trainings are full day trainings in and of themselves. Always happy to come back. It's nice to meet you all in person. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, this is super helpful, and I will we'll have Erin attach the digital version to the agenda, so the public will have the digital version. I'll put it into the school committee drive so people can go through it. I know I can't really read the small print on the paper, so we will do that. So thank you so much for coming. We will certainly reach out if we have any questions.
Thanks, Peter.
And just for the public, we are gonna take a 5-minute recess to reset the room before we start the regional meeting. So if Minuteman can mute us, that would be great. Thank you. Back from our workshop, and now we're gonna continue with our meeting. And we're gonna start with the superintendent and chair's updates. So Lori, I'll hand it to you first.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna just focus on one main new piece of news. Yesterday, Principal Matt Lucy at Willard announced his retirement. 9 years that he gave service to our students. So that has pivoted my attention over the last couple of days, and that will be obviously a priority. It is, the gift he gave us is it's prime hiring season for administrators, so I actually posted this morning just to get it in the mix with the folks that are actively looking right now. I'll be outlining a process, Kara will help, some of the other central office, and we'll put together a whole very inclusive process like we did at Thoreau a few years ago. And more to come on that, but that is the priority all of a sudden. So we're so grateful to Mr. Lucy and all he gave to Willard and the students here. He's really been a phenomenal leader and really respected and loved. I had a teacher tell me that I heard kids got up and said they were really angry at him. Everyone else is that mixed, bittersweet. We're so glad for him. He's gonna do something else. None of us are really wired to like go sit and retire, I don't think, but just go enjoy the next phase of his life, and we're sad for us. So that's my update, because that's all I've done for 2 days. So I think I'm gonna stick with that today, and we'll keep you posted.
Well, we definitely wish him well, and I think I said it to you that there's nothing like your kid's first principal.
Yeah.
Like you just really connect with them,
Yeah.
so I'm sure the parents, Andrew will be
Oh
sad.
my
I know
gosh.
Andrew's very sad.
We were crying last night.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
So we wish him well, but we understand. Okay, I didn't have much. The only thing I'll just
Sorry,
mention,
Tracy.
oh yeah,
Lori, do you expect that process to be different than what was it Thoreau or similar?
No, I actually pulled all the Thoreau material up this morning and gonna use that as the map. So, no, very, very similar.
and then the only thing I want to just mention, Vision of Graduate happened last night. Sandeep attended that, so that was at the high school again. So I think you were very involved in that. and-
We were all there.
Oh, you were
too.
all there last
Yeah.
night, all right, so I had to miss last night, so I
That's
apologize. And I didn't really have anything else at the region. Do you have anything at CPS?
I will save it. The only update I had was from the solar project, so I
So you'll
will,
save that,
I'll save that for our agenda.
okay? And then I'm gonna ask Brian to give like a little Carlisle update.
Little Carlisle update.
It's a large one.
Yeah, so we've got a few things going on in Carlisle. Obviously the biggest news as it relates to the Carlisle School Committee is that Superintendent O'Shea is going to retire at the end of this year. We are still in early days in terms of figuring out what this means. Tomorrow we're actually, and was already scheduled before all of this, we're kicking off our strategic planning process. We spoke to the facilitator. Tomorrow, besides talking about strengths and weaknesses of the district, we'll be just talking about and getting a sense from this 50 some odd person group what they want to see in terms of, the future structure of the Carlisle leadership. Because keep in mind, he was also this year the acting middle school principal, which was a choice of his. But we've got a lot of work to do just in terms of figuring out the go forward plan. I will say, and Lynette is welcome to chime in, I am, all options are currently being weighed right now. I spent Saturday afternoon, fortunately there was nobody else at home, just charting pros, cons. I think I came up with 7 or 8 different options, digging through the archives of the Mosquito to learn what we've looked at before. And we're gonna have a special school committee meeting next Wednesday to talk about it more. So that's really all I can say at this point in terms of that. Just some other Carlisle updates quickly. Last night, the Carlisle CPC met, which was why I wasn't at Vision of a Graduate. Our applications are due the 2nd of February, but reviewed the application for the amenities building. The committee is pretty much, I would say 2/3 are the same as last year, so they're very familiar with the project. The only real question was, based on what we're asking for and what Concord has, what happens if it's even more than that once the estimates come in, and they just want that addressed in the application. So I'll work with Dr. Hunter and Bob on that.
And
Emma,
Brian has done the whole application himself from Carlisle, just I wanna give you props on it. So thank you for continuing to work on that
yeah, this year's application was a lot easier than
last
last
year.
year's, had a starting point.
Yeah.
Final update for Carlisle, last week was what we call the FinCom Marathon meetings. Over the course of 2 nights, they meet with every single department to talk about the budget. The region did present last Thursday. There were questions, of course, wanting to understand some of the asks, some of the spend. The next steps in that is that FinCom meets this coming Wednesday, so a week from today. And then if they have specific direction, guidance, advice, whatever you wanna call it, we will get that in writing next Thursday. So we're in sort of a holding pattern until we make more there. I think that covers everything for Carlisle.
And Aisha is not with us tonight and Michelle is away, so the only update Aisha had is she's scheduling another parent meeting. They're still trying to get some interest in people to be on Medco PTG, but they've had one parent meeting, they're gonna have another one shortly, so we'll get an update at our next meeting. And I think that's all I have. All right, so on to our discussion, you did get materials today on the additional $25,000 amenities building, so there is a memo that Bob sent us. So this does require a vote, but I'm gonna turn it to Bob to just kind of quickly walk us through that.
So we had some remaining scope of work left. It didn't make sense to pay Gale Associates to do the work until the sewer connection was approved by the department, the Public Works Commission in Concord. With that approval in December, sometime in December, we wanted to move forward with the rest of the project. There are some remaining funds that we put into capital stabilization, but there has been some additional scope of work over the past year and a half they've been working on this, so this will get them to completion. I don't think we're gonna use all of the 25, and some of that will be returned to capital stabilization, but I don't wanna bring a vote again for a small amount if I don't need to. So I'm requesting 25,000 to finish the rest of their work, which is to prepare invitation for bid, like the detailed design specs, 100% complete, they're like 95% complete now. Have them reviewed by Department of Public Works, get all the necessary permits, and then we'll have bid ready documents that just need town meeting approval, so the 2 CPC bid requests. And then the other documents, requesting approval of 25,000, and I have the motion language included here as well.
Okay, great. Any discussion on that?
Just a question, I'm looking back to the May 2025, there was a $350,000 that we have the capital stabilization.
Correct.
And my understanding then was that that's gonna be partly for the sewer connection, sewer workup, is that correct?
Correct. Some of that's for the sewer connection. We can't actually spend what's in capital stabilization without you authorizing us to use it. So we put that in capital stabilization. When it comes time to pay the sewer connection fee, I'd have to ask you again for authorization to pay that sewer connection fee out of capital stabilization. But part of that $350 will cover the sewer connection fee. We won't need to use all of it for that. And I'm gonna use 25,000 to finish the design for the amenities building. I don't know if that answered your question.
Do we have any further insight into what the sewer connection fee will be? When will we know that?
It was in the 200, I saw a number of like 280, but I think that included some actual work that we're doing in the project. I think that they were looking to compare apples to apples compost to sewer connection. So I think they included a little bit of the construction costs in there. I think the sewer connection fee is between $210 and $250. And I can get an exact number from them, but it's less than $300,000.
So would this be up to $225,000 or?
If you authorized 25,000, I would we would just transfer it into an amenities building project fund.
Okay.
And then if there's money left, I just report to you that I'm returning money to the capital stabilization fund.
And that there's an expectation, because again, when I look back, I'm looking back to May, expecting like to have surplus remaining at the end?
A little bit, yeah, we'll have to pay the sewer connection fee, this 25, there'll be, I think there should be a little bit left, yes.
I move that the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee authorize use of $25,000 in capital stabilization funds for additional costs to finalize the design and permitting for the amenities building project.
Second.
Alright, further discussion? No, all in favor? Opposed? Okay. And then we have the approval of the regional bus lease, and Bob sent these documents today also, so
Yeah,
Bob,
so first,
you're on
just
again.
my apologies about the timing of getting this to you, we had a different, we usually have TD Bank as the low bidder, we had a different bank that we had to work through their lease agreements with the attorney. So we've gotten everything ironed out, and then we had a mistake by our bus vendor on the invoice price that caused documents to need to be redone, so my apologies in getting it to you today, I usually get it to you sooner. So let me just share the screen here. So we're leasing 2 buses, we procured them with Anderson Motors, and the total cost that we'll be financing is $358,784. That's net of, we're trading in 2 old buses, we're getting $6,600 back each. The interest rate that the bank is Cogent Bank, the interest rate they're offering is 3.49, which was a decent amount below TD Bank and then a third vendor, a third financial institution. And what's required is a school committee vote to execute a lease. We lease the buses over 5 years. And there's specific language that the leasing company and our attorney have on the next page. You don't have to read the resolution, but you can just say that we need you to basically approve and authorize the resolution that's on the next page, and you can just use the motion language that I quoted there. But this is part of our core strategy of replacing 2 buses in each district each year to maintain a current fleet of buses.
We have 35 or so.
Yeah, not some of them in better condition than others,
Okay.
But yeah.
I move that the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee authorize the attached resolution for lease purchase financing of 2 school buses as written.
Second.
Any questions, comments? No? All in favor? Alright, and up last on the regional agenda is a $5,000 grant acceptance for Concord Carlisle Adult and Community Ed. This was an anonymous donation. And can you say what's on behalf of, please?
I think so,
Say that.
in memory of James Jovnich, a Carlisle member of the US Coast Guard Auxiliary, who taught boating and safety classes.
Alright, so it's one of our roles as school committee is to accept donations, so I'd entertain a motion to accept the $5,000 donation.
Move we accept the $5,000 grant for the Concord Carlisle Adult Community Ed.
And do we have a second?
Seconded.
Okay, any further discussion, comments? No? All in favor?
Aye.
That's great.
Thank you.
And with that, thank you to our Carlisle members. I'm gonna adjourn the region. Thanks for coming on a regional night for our training.
Happy to do so.
Love to have you here.
Surprise your families for dinner.
I know. Say, look what time
Or
it
go
is.
to Carlisle.
Or don't go home.
I know, I don't know.
No problem. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Yes, see you tomorrow.
What time is
Are we on time?
Right. Do we have our student for the 3P1?
He's not available till 6:30.
Okay. Should we open public comment first? We can do reorder the agenda or
I move to move public, because I'm not the chair, I move to move public comment up, and then move recognitions to 6:30 when our students with us.
Second.
So,
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
All right. I'd like to open it up for public comment. I am not on Zoom.
I'm
so
on Zoom, so I can type.
I have not received any blue sheets in the room.
And I don't see any hands on Zoom.
This has never happened.
Someone.
Okay.
It's okay.
When we need to buy 6 minutes, there's no comment.
Okay, we can go to the next item.
Okay.
That's fine.
I will close public comment.
All right.
We need another motion to get correspondence up, right?
Well, I think we just do the
Oh,
correspondence.
cause you
and then
said
at
put it
that
at
point-
6:30, okay.
Well, yeah, I said just put it at 6:30.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
On the CPS front, the only correspondence I had since the last meeting was a question about when our calendar was gonna be released, which has since been released. So that is it on my side.
And I don't think there's anything in the region.
I didn't see much.
I didn't see anything. Okay,
Quiet.
that's it.
Okay.
Here's where it gets tricky, is this is a presentation. Is he online yet? We don't see him yet.
No, it's not quite 6:30. I am happy to do the CMS solar update. That will take about 5 minutes.
Great.
So, let's see, can I do that out of order?
I'd move up the CMS, solar discussion.
I move that we open the agenda until 6:30 when the student arrives at 11.
Okay.
Okay, I'll withdraw my motion, thanks.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, solar update. There was some stuff in the bridge and just general chatter about solar, and we're getting questions about where it stands. So, Lori and Bob have been pretty involved with CMLP, and I thought I invited Jason to come tonight. By the way, he couldn't come, and that's on me, but we invited him a little late, so he will be at the next meeting. So my goal tonight was to keep this on rather than just give a chair's update, talk about where the project stands, so you guys are in the loop. And then you can formulate any questions, which I'd ask for, I'm happy to try to answer. I'm not the guru, I'm just passing information, but he will be here at the next meeting and we can have more of a discussion. So this is more of a setup. So from our perspective as a committee where this stands, prior to this sitting committee, the previous committee worked with CMLP, primarily Bob and Lori. We discussed that as a committee. We approved an agreement where they were gonna CMLP was gonna go out and get bids for roof solar on the Ellen Garrison building. Over the summer, CMLP put together an IFD, so an invitation for bid, which is very similar to an RFP. They had a lot of interest throughout the summer and into the early fall with a lot of people asking questions, doing site walks, etc. But it's a very complicated project. Our roof is a membrane on the Ellen Garrison building. And so it's not like you just, even though it was structurally designed for solar panels, you're not like bolting these in because it ruins the membrane. And if you do bolt it in, it passes the warranty to whoever is doing the work on the roof, which is not in the best interest of all the work we did in Concord to put that together. We don't want to forfeit any warranties. So ultimately, there were only 2 bidders that emerged in August and September. And there were concerns with both, basically. So under the guidance of CMLP's legal counsel, they decided to revoke the IFB. And so here we are, we do not have an open IFB. We're not procuring this for now. And the reason why it's complicated is if we're not drilling on the roof, there's only really 2 other ways to attach solar panels on this, and I'm not an expert, I'm just regurgitating information, which I memorized. You can either bond the panels to the membrane, which doesn't void the warranty, but the bonding agent and way to do it is very, very hard to do, and there's only one, as far as we know, there's only one supplier across the US and potentially farther that will actually take this on. And then the other method is weighting the panels down so they don't blow away. So one of the bids had the bonding, one of the bids had the weighting. Though it is designed structurally, the weighting does add like a lot of additional weight on top of the solar panel weight. So that contributed to the legal decision as well as cost to close the IFB. So since that happened in late October or early November, we've been working with CMLP. We re-signed our agreement so that they can go back out to bid. and they can reevaluate the project to see if we wanna change the scope or change the bid in any way to make it more feasible and hopefully invite some more bidders, so that's what the CMLP update was as of yesterday, I believe. Did I leave anything out?
No, I think just we wanna be sure we're saying very clearly to the community, we are very engaged and interested in moving the project forward. We're working with CMLP very closely
Yep.
to try to be as successful as possible here. There's obviously a lot of complications to it, and cost sounds like it's probably gonna be one of them.
Yeah.
But we're very committed to the solar efforts at the middle school and serving the community for what they asked for.
Yeah, and speaking of Jason, you know, just echoing, like, I think everyone wants this, like, there's not, like, no one wants this, it just, I think, became more complicated from the initial idea, town meeting, to actually when the rubber hit the road, or rubber's a bad analogy, because of the membrane, but like, it's very complicated. So yeah, I reaffirmed this with Jason yesterday, as did Lori and Bob, but like, everyone wants this, we wanna make it happen, we wanna be supportive. This is the first time it's come up in a meeting since last spring. So we will work with CMLP in every capacity we can to move contracts forward, to help support them as they go back out or re-strategize, whatever it may be, so. That is the backdrop to the next meeting, we will have Jason here and we can talk about next steps, which are very much up in the air.
Couple of questions, sorry.
Yes?
No, if you have questions for.
So one of them was, you mentioned that legal concerns
IFP.
with this, right? That's CMLP legal?
Yes. Not school legal.
And I think you said the second part of it. The next steps in this process we'll have to identify along with Jason.
Yeah, CMLP, their board, it might even be rethinking, you know, how we go about this in general, so it's very much in the air.
So they're not waiting on anything from us at this point?
No. Michael?
It's just, I know this isn't on the agenda, it's just some information that happened within the last week that pertains to the bicentennial incident reporting work group.
That's not on the agenda.
I know.
Wait, are we talking about solar?
No, it's not, I know it's not on the agenda, it's just a point of information.
Can I ask a question about solar before
Sure,
we move on
go
to
ahead.
something else? On the, well, part of the conversation around solar was having the canopies over the parking lot,
Yeah.
which I know there was a lot of concerns about visibility to the building and
Yeah.
the just appearance of it, but I'm
And the
curious,
expense.
and the expense of that, so do you have an update on where that stands?
That could be very much so, the original project was scoped for panels on the
Yeah.
roof with the option of canopies, so. Right, so the next phase could include shifting it from the roof to canopies, but it wasn't budgeted for that, so. And I don't wanna speak over my skis here, but
Okay,
I don't think it's off the
so
table.
is that what, as when you say all options are still on the table, that's one of the
Yeah, Jason had
options to
mentioned that
look
yesterday.
look to, okay,
Correct.
okay, thank you.
They also have to balance the impact to the ratepayers, and I think the rooftop is more attractive than the canopies
Okay,
financially.
okay.
And is the weighted, or is it still under warranty with weighted?
Yes,
So in both options,
both
that they
those
have
two,
out
there's
there.
3 options, right, drilling to the membrane.
drilling is, nulls
Weighted,
the warranty, but the weighted and the other.
correct, it's
Okay.
called ballast, and then also the
Okay.
welding.
And the building can sustain that, I mean, I know I'm talking to you like you're an expert on this,
Yeah,
but
well, might as well.
Yeah.
It's sustain-
He had a
sounds
very
like he
intense
learned a
half
lot.
hour with Jason yesterday, so
Yeah, I don't wanna be quoted in the bridge for misspeaking on, I don't know this.
okay. Thank you.
And so our
If you have
next,
So
additional-
next week, yeah,
If you
maybe I'll
have-
just think about an
Yeah, and put 'em
send
in-
some
Yeah,
questions
put
for,
them in questions,
Jason next
we'll get with Jason and make sure that he answers.
so questions about solar go to you, and is it gonna be on the CPS meeting? Or do we
That's-
have to do
That's the intent.
CPS at the
I
regional?
wanna organize with him earlier to make sure he can be here,
Okay,
which was on me.
okay.
Andrew,
So-
one more question. Again. Do you have a question on solar?
No, I don't.
Okay. Let's say this thing had gotten approved last year with whatever the bids that came in.
Mhm.
Do we have kind of an expected timeline or is
I
that
think it's
kind of-
out the door at this point.
wait, what does that mean, it's out the door?
Like, I think the expected timeline was to a.
Oh, the timeline is
Yeah.
out the door, like
Right.
that's not gonna happen because
Yeah.
of the complications that we run into, okay.
Yeah.
And so is it on CMLP to come up with a new proposal, or is it joint? Where does the like responsibility
Yeah,
lie?
they will come up with the proposal
Okay.
and we have committed to supporting that, listening to it, and then we'll, if the scope changes, we'll hear it as a committee and decide if we wanna approve it or not.
All done?
I'm questioned out.
Thanks, I'm done.
Simple point that I just wanted to bring up, the Bicentennial incident.
What you're about to talk about is not on the agenda, which we just
I
heard.
understand- I
So you're
understand.
violating open meeting law, and that's up to you.
It's my understanding that the agenda does not preclude something that's occurred in the interval. I'm not pointing up as a point of information for us all to be aware. There's a conversation, our district attorney, Middlesex County presented, and it's something informative for all of us in the community to be able to watch. Just to understand, I think it offers us a great opportunity to bring conversation to our community on issues that bear on our community, so I think it's something that we could all.
Yeah, I talked to the district attorney at 3:30 this afternoon. She was very supportive of the schools. She said that conversation, and I haven't seen the meeting, I heard this third hand, I got a report from the bridge. It's not on the agenda, but I am gonna respond if that's okay through the
I'm
chair.
not saying yes or no, it's not on the
So-
agenda.
Can I start off by apologizing? I should have, put in a liaison report after that meeting, did not get to it, so that's why others are not up to speed on that. We were at the meeting, we'll try to be better about that liaison report.
Well, it isn't on the agenda, but the district attorney is very supportive. Feels like she knows what's happening here in the schools. The police are reporting what we report to them. She is gonna share with me any reports they've gotten through the portal that she apparently mentioned. She didn't know off the top of her head what those were. She said they were a mix of school and community. Things have been checked into, whatever they've heard. I haven't heard anything, so I'm assuming whatever she heard about was mild or not warranted a phone call. She stated that we will continue to collaborate like we did in July, and that we're here to partner and they're here to offer resources. So I, again, haven't seen the meeting, I've only heard pieces of it, but I did pick up the phone and ask for some feedback, and that was what I heard at 3:30.
So the meeting's viewable online and it's not up for discussion because it's not on the agenda. Is that what you're saying?
That's my understanding.
Okay,
Alright, do we have our student for the recognition?
I just texted his mom, I haven't heard back, I think she's driving.
I don't
Okay.
see him
We're coming
online.
back to the scenes for
Okay,
Oh,
Okay.
that's the Wachusett situation.
um,
I think just go. I think.
Justin, are you ready?
He's ready.
Yes.
Okay, why don't we start, and if we see that student, maybe we'll either pause or if they can wait, I don't really know.
Cool day for Concord Rec Ski.
I know it's really cold.
Tried to get this so we can do it in slideshow view. I don't know if it works yet.
I don't know what Peter did to make it work.
He tried to show me, but I still don't.
I don't know.
So I'm sorry, I gotta use it in that format. It's okay, it's big enough.
Or do you want to provide some context?
Yes,
or-
just briefly, the middle school was recognized by DESE, as you know, for closing gaps, specifically back to pre-pandemic performance. And so it felt really important to have them share with you and the community what they shared at the conference they were invited to present at with other districts that were in the same category. And so we're here to really just listen and learn. I don't think there's things here you don't know, but it's all packaged together in a, here's the plan that got made and the outcomes are substantiated. And that's what you always ask of me. I was like, how do you know it worked? Well, this time we have evidence it worked. So I want you to be able to tell them the story.
Thank you, Lauren. So we were twice recognized by DESE. We were one of, I think, 38 schools in the Commonwealth that achieved this milestone. And then we were one of, we believe, 16 of the 40 who was asked to present and share out some practices of the why we think we're back to where we some academic achievement, and as Lori said, closing the gaps and working on closing the gaps. I guess let me preface the fact that we're not exactly where we want to be yet, but we're about to model what we modeled at the DESE conference to why we think we'll eventually get there. I'd like to introduce Olive Bradford, assistant principal, part of an amazing team at the middle school. Very proud, Dan Hauserman and Olive Bradford helped Tori and myself lead an academic professional development day yesterday with our teachers. And just being from 3 other districts before Concord, not your assistant principals aren't always academic leaders, and they are here. And I just want to share that with the committee. I'm going to turn it over to Olive, the first half of the slide.
Thank you for having us here tonight to talk about a part of our programming at the middle school that we're really proud of. So we're going to talk about a specific part of our master schedule called the enrichment block. Every 6th grader is available at the same time, 3 times a cycle. A couple middle school parents in the room know this. Same for the 7th grade, same for the 8th grade. Those are different blocks, but each grade level has these shared blocks. And we developed this with the purpose of offering additional support, MTSS, to students who need a variety of things. So we're just going to talk a little bit about that process, how we identify the students that participate, how we do the logistics of placement, and then some of the programming that occurs during that block.
I don't think it's anywhere, so before she continues, I just want to stress the fact, something I've said here in the school improvement plan presentations. Our teachers lead these intervention and enrichment blocks. It's the licensed social studies teacher, the licensed math teacher, the licensed science teacher, even arts and wellness. That's not how it always is in the secondary level. Often in the secondary level, even sometimes elementary, it's your specialists or your special educators that lead. And that's one type of expertise and license. The secondary level really is the impactfulness of the relationship that the students have with their teacher that they're seeing for a second time for enrichment or intervention. We find is so meaningful, and that's kind of the secret sauce of this master schedule that's been in place since 2021.
So our process, if you think about students who might need a little additional support in the elementary school model, they're with a classroom teacher, the same classroom teacher for most of the day. My child talks about students being borrowed from that classroom teacher, and it's a pretty easy process. The specialist goes in and takes who they need, and it's the same teacher, and they're interfacing with 2 adults. If you're talking about middle school or high school, you're talking about a much wider collection of adults who are working with students and a more complex schedule where we're trying not to interrupt students' access to the curriculum and the schedule while also providing something extra, which is pretty complicated, right? It's the same amount of time, but we want to give more time to students having certain things. So the first step in the process is this identifying which students need which, and we use we use a process of triangulation to do this. So the first is looking at the tools that we have in math and ELA, and we also have a social emotional tool I'll talk about in a second. So we use STAR 360, which all of you know. Students take STAR 3 times a year in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade at about midway through the trimester in order to start thinking about, get that process started early about who needs what. So the math teachers and the ELA teachers in isolation look at how students are performing on those. They look at the MCAS data from the previous spring, and they also look at how students are performing in their classes, grade-wise and anecdotal data. So you see this was a STAR report that teachers might be looking at. And the next slide there is looking at MCAS results. And then the last one. So this is our DESA screener. So the math and ELA teachers are looking at the STAR data. Our guidance counselors look at how students performed on a screener we give in the fall called DESA. It's a 5 to 7 minute online survey that students are actually answering questions about themselves, and it is incredibly informative in terms of how they're feeling about themselves, about relationships, about school, about in general, you can see at the bottom there some of the categories. So guidance counselors are looking at that information, the math and ELA teachers are looking at their information, and then we ask the classroom teachers, other teachers who teach those students, also to come to a meeting that happens about 2/3 of the way through the trimester to share out any concerns about students who may be having challenges executive functioning, just keeping together materials, staying organized, staying on top of schoolwork, and also teachers who might notice some of the SEL needs of students they see who may not have screened on DESA, but may be wanting to share those concerns. So that's the teacher observation piece. So all of that information, we ask that 2 of the 3 contribute. So if a student has not performed well on STAR and on MCAS, but maybe is doing okay in a class, that's still a student who recommended for intervention. Same if MCAS was okay, but now STAR in the classroom doesn't work. So that's a research-based method for identifying students. And then we have this meeting that we affectionately call the draft. So there's a team meeting about 2/3 of the way through the trimester, and the English teacher and the math teacher and the guidance counselor and the rest of the team that work with those students sit together, and there's some conversation, because maybe a student needs help in math and also in ELA, that's not uncommon. So what do we prioritize? We think about who the group in intervention might be, the urgency of the need of intervention. SEL often takes priority because that is often a driving force of the performance in math and ELA. And the teams put together their list of who they want to recommend for each intervention. And a student may be in ELA term 1 and then in math term 2, so there's time for that different support to happen. So at the team meeting, there's a bucket of students who are recommended for intervention, and we communicate with parents first and share this information. Your student's been recommended for intervention for the following reasons, and we phrase it as a recommendation for the reasons that the parent knows their child the best and is getting this information from the school and may say, I understand, but we actually, all that my student says that they're excited about coming to school is art. If there's an art enrichment, that's really gonna be the thing. Right now, I'm having trouble getting that kid out the door. A math intervention is just gonna be an additional thing that causes that issue. For the most part, parents accept the recommendation, but they have the option to say no thank you. So either the student is placed in intervention or opted out and then receiving a menu of enrichment classes. So anybody who is not recommended for an intervention gets a choice form with a fascinating collection of courses all tied to teachers' licenses. So an English teacher might teach a creative writing enrichment. We have a math teacher who teaches a puzzles course. A science teacher is teaching a neuroscience class. These are all just 6th grade examples. It's really incredible what teachers come up with. Some people teach the same thing a couple trimesters in a row because so many students requested in the first term that they want to do it again. Other times teachers are saying, I'm now really excited about astronomy. You know, there's this mission that's going out into outer space that I really want to get kids interested in. So that's the menu that goes home to families where the intervention recommendation has not been made or has been turned down by parents.
To give a little more detail too, on where you see these fall into the master schedule, these are our only trimester-based classes. So I'll go back to the conversation that Olive was sharing, that we often have with parents about recommendations of intervention. You know, often parents will meet their own child where their child is and our recommendation and place their child in intervention for, say, first trimester. And then we will monitor their growth, progress monitor them through the STAR. And then we'll look at whether or not they need to continue in intervention, or maybe in the second trimester, which is right around Thanksgiving, they might go on to an enrichment class. One of the things that we were fascinated about in 2021 when we put this master schedule and plan in place is we wanted to call all of them enrichment classes and take out the stigma of the intervention. And we're very proud to say that all the kids carry that as well, regardless of the size of class they're in. I really think, going back to the secret sauce that I mentioned, it's the fact that they're in front of their grade level teacher. You know, so it is tier 2 hiding in plain sight, you know, and preventing, not the best word, but it's also the gatekeeper and holding back some families who are looking so quickly to make the testing or the evaluation for special education because we're able to offer this intervention in the tier 2 model. We also lean into the research that says by the 3rd trimester, if the intervention isn't really moving the needle, we actually want to move the student into an enrichment, surround them with their peers that might stretch them and challenge them. Because at this age, it's their peers as much as the teacher in front of them that is making them grow. So that happens often in this block. You see that the teachers and the students teach every other day, this enrichment or intervention block. We borrow a little from our tier 1 advisory model as well, where guidance counselors, administrators, both of us are teaching in this block, both of us have a teaching license. I have taught a PE intervention that is a hybrid of kids who need that intervention with kids because they're middle school who just want a second PE class. So it's like it's a combination or a hybrid of the students who data suggests needs an intervention and data that suggests that they're fine in enrichment, but they leaned into that class that was on the enrichment menu for the families and for the students. So our MTSS, our enrichment curriculum, is all about the model that you see here, the pre-teaching, the reteaching, the extensions. You know, the other piece that the enrichment block is doing that I'm sure all of you know is one of the metrics that DESE is using to make sure that we're moving the needle is growing even our high achieving population. So often for districts that achieve well on these metrics, you know, if the students who are achieving well just kind of flatline from like say 5th grade all the way through the middle school years, DESE's not going to offer recognition for that, and that isn't how you get into, you know, what used to be called these different levels that DESE no longer does. So we're tasked to not only grow and shorten the gaps and focus on the students who need intervention, but we're also tasked to support our students of the high achieving caliber as well. So this is something that Olive reviewed about 5 minutes ago, the different options that are available for the students. And again, for the students who really wanted to get into, let's say, you know, rocking and rolling with Spiros, they might be disappointed first trimester, but they can go forward again in the 2nd or the 3rd trimester as well. One of the things that we wanted to make sure that was a part of these enrichment blocks, okay, again, doesn't matter if the student's in intervention or enrichment, is it's a project-based course. It's a course that students, they should feel re-energized, their curiosity, their love for the discipline and the subject matter. We don't give homework in this block, but we do encourage a lot of hands-on projects that they're building towards, and at the end of each trimester, we have a huge grade level showcase that I have to say the building is built for. So when we were doing this at Sanborn and Peabody, you know, we were in all these awkward spots in the building, where now you just walk the entire grade level hallway, and we have all of these grade level areas. What do we call them again?
Commons.
Commons, thank you. I don't know how you guys do this, it's pretty late. Grade level commons where this picture, actually all these pictures are from the grade level commons and from our new building. So we're also, what we're doing to the teachers is we're modeling them, you know, how kids thrive of this age level and what they really lean into. And what's been really interesting, a happy accident if you will, is the number of teachers that take something that was born in their enrichment class and they actually bring it into their core class to make sure that whatever that is, all the students have access to that. So that's been sort of a happy accident this block as well. I think that's pretty much it. Do you wanna hit on the enrichment program? I guess the last slide.
Yeah, we just looked at data to compare before and after, since that was the DESE recognition. So since 2021, the MCAS scores after the first year, so 2021, the sixth graders started the enrichment block and we rolled it out 1 year at a time. So we saw 20-point growth in SGP and ELA and same in math. And MCAS moving from 67 to 80% proficiency in ELA and 53 to 71 in math. And last year, the ELA, just looking at the students who were involved in the intervention blocks over the 3 trimesters, 38 students participated, SGP was 60, so you can see that's above the others, and 12 of the students moved up a level of MCAS, so 1/3 of those students from just 1 trimester of intervention.
Very impressive.
Thank you. Yeah,
You had mentioned that you were noticing teachers bringing the enrichment material into their classroom. Is that, and into their standard classrooms, is that what you think is part of the change in teaching system, lifting all boats?
Yes, certainly for student engagement.
I think universal design for learning is really alive in this block. Project-based learning is really alive in this block. And it's just given teachers permission to not just do it in the block, but bring it into their other 4 classes as well.
So you'll have to excuse my ignorance on this. How do you provide the same, I guess, enrichment if kids are on IEPs and do you work, is the same process that's followed or different?
Yes. So with services, we're able to, for the most part, consult with parents going into the school year about where IEP services fall. So there is a loss usually of something in the schedule, but parents and families are often able to choose. So looking at, here are the specials that you have, or taking away from enrichment block for a service. I think there may be 4 or 5 students who have IEP services during enrichment block, but out of 200 students per grade level, it's pretty low. And yes, they have the same opportunity. We try not to, that's one of the things that the conversations that happen in the draft. So if a student has a math service on their IEP and is already getting support there and also needs support in English, it probably makes more sense to have the English support, and but that varies too depending on who the kid is and what they need.
Can I ask you a question about the enrichment fair? Not a fair, I don't know what you call it.
Showcase.
Showcase, I'm like, okay.
And the
you're thinking of
team comes.
There we go. So if you're getting intervention like in math, so you're still doing a project to participate in that showcase?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
very
that
cool.
came online, so I'm currently doing a creative writing enrichment, which allows for us to build to the showcase so much easier. I think the showcase came online right when I stopped the PE enrichment / intervention.
Which was a social emotional intervention.
Correct.
I think it wasn't a P, like a.
Correct. It was an SEL intervention. But
Through the
I
gymnasium.
just remember thinking, like we're building towards this showcase, and I still don't know what I would do for that showcase.
Right.
Although the PE teachers, I think, what did they do for the showcase?
They invent games through their enrichments.
Yeah.
So students made PowerPoints with videos of these
That's right.
invented different games and had to come up with the rules, and that was the final product of their time there. I did a 7th grade ELA intervention last term, and students were working up towards a final project in their ELA class, which was a big persuasive piece of writing having to do with Greek mythology. And so we did persuasive pieces of writing about, they started 5 different prompts about schooling. One student ended up writing about how every student should take finance classes just to practice those persuasive writing skills, and then that's what they showcased. So it was a group of 5 students as opposed to 16, but everybody's walking around at the showcase, and it's not walking in and seeing this intervention class. It all flows, so it seems like the same kind of thing.
And it's, I feel like it's so developmentally appropriate, at the high school they have flex block where yes, there's choice, but there's also, you can get locked into a flex. for that intervention, but here in middle school, like, you're giving them a little bit of choice, but yet you're getting to what they really need during those 2 blocks during the week. You know, and we talk a lot about getting back to pre-pandemic levels. You're actually exceeding, if I'm reading this correctly, are you exceeding pre-pandemic levels in some
Yeah,
areas?
I think in some metrics we are.
Yep.
There's still growth to be made in others. But yes,
But clearly, you know, you're being recognized by the state for, you know, exceptional work, so really great work.
in a spring that we moved into one building.
In the spring, we moved into one
So,
building, exactly.
I always forget to bring that part of
Yeah.
the story,
Yeah.
but when I was speaking to the faculty and staff yesterday about being in front of all of you, I made sure that they heard that the recognition is all of theirs. And we found a way to do this when we took a 2-building model and we moved into 1 building. So that's the part of the story that we didn't even bring to Marlboro to the DESI conference. But that's the piece that I find that's pretty special. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I have kids that have had intervention on IEPs in elementary school, and we've just been blown away by, you know, the coordination, the complexity of it, and the teamwork aspect of it. And then I think the middle school, and I look at your schedule on slide 8, and there's that whole complexity of the schedule issue. So I think this is super cool. And I was gonna ask if the building helped, but you've answered that now twice. That's great. But I guess my last question would be, where do you see this going? Like, is this kind of like locked in as V1, and you have visions to go like beyond this, and maybe you want to see how this goes? Like, how can we be helpful, I guess?
Yeah, just you know, further commitment of this master schedule. You know, I felt like some of this was a lie, believe it or not, in the after school program. I came into Concord 9 years ago. You know, I think all of you know, and I appreciate the support of a very robust after school program. But I worry about the access that our students have to that. And we've known this data for, decades now, that after school is not the best time to stretch, grow, and give intervention to kids. Kids are burnt out. So the access worried me, and they weren't at their best. And we are fortunate that a lot of our teachers, all of our teachers, are the club advisors, you know, to our multiple math clubs, our multiple STEM clubs, our multiple SEL clubs, but all of them are obviously available during the school day. You know, having an elementary school kiddo who's on an IEP, you know, when that special educator or service provider comes into her classroom, she's very aware, and she's telling me that, you know. So one of the things that is just so important that I've mentioned a few times is a master schedule where all of this is hiding in plain sight. And the students see all of us as instructional leaders. You know, we're advisors, we're teachers, we're just not administrators. We're breaking down that stigma, you know, and I think that's important as well. So just to maintain a commitment to where we are is huge.
So, you guys I know have put kids at the center of learning, right, with the student-led conference and things, which by the way I was blown away by. Have you considered bringing some aspect of that in the sense that student-led ideas for enrichment classes or something into this?
Yeah, I think part of that, I'm interested in how all of you get into this question, is the showcase. You know, because when you're walking the showcase, it's very much like the civics action project, where each kid is at the ready to share out their learning and what they've learned for that entire, you know, trimester.
We polled students 3 years ago, I think, maybe in, like, it doesn't matter, asking for ideas. And I think we got some good course ideas, but it wasn't a structured enough question in terms of we wanted to hit all of these different disciplines. And I wonder if it's time to do it again here and have maybe more of a guided the way to do it and help them pick things. Because enrichment's supposed to be a push, it's hard for them to identify the things that they don't know that they wanna learn more about, I think it's so figuring out how to do that better.
A student who developed an enrichment class.
That's true, the civics action that's happening right now.
Yeah.
There's
So
the answer.
we had a students, try to follow this, we had a student civics action project be developing an enrichment course.
For
which-
student athletes
Yeah.
who are feeling overwhelmed by their sports commitment, executive functioning, and so it's the 3 days are like some working out. Yeah.
So we had a middle school student develop a 4-month-long course for the school.
That's really cool.
Well, we really appreciate you coming. It's a long day, so please pass along to your staff that we really appreciate all the work that they're doing. I get that, so it's great, and yeah, this is great. This is something to be celebrated, and we love it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, you might wanna stay, Felix is here. Do you wanna do
Project 350.
Yeah, can we do that?
recognition?
He's here. Oh.
You are? Come on up.
I'll trade you.
Project 351. I know there are 351 towns and cities in Massachusetts, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us more.
You learned that.
Wow, it was really inspirational. We started at Faneuil Hall.
So this past weekend,
Yeah,
Project 351 had their launch date, it was Saturday.
Saturday.
Yeah, I am curious because their goal, the nonprofit Project 351, is to get 351 eighth graders to the State House to launch the year of service learning. Any idea how close they got to 351?
They got way above it.
Way above it.
Because some towns have a lot more middle schools. Boston sent a ton of
Okay.
8th graders.
Yep, that makes sense.
Amherst and Lowell sent 3, and there were a bunch of others that sent multiple.
Remember the days I tried to send one from Peabody and one from Sanborn and they said no to me.
Yeah,
One
so
school, two buildings.
Yes.
Yes.
One school.
They do that. So Saturday, how was Saturday?
it was really amazing. Honestly, we got there. It was a lot of people, a lot of inspirational people. The founder of the Playbook Initiative was there. The founder of the Boston's Children Orchestra was there. Just a lot of philanthropists and all these different people and speakers. Gladys Vega spoke. She got a Good Trouble Award for running a food pantry and just giving so much to the community. And then we went off and went to these service sites. And we just worked together for a day and made all these different things. And they said we impacted 25,000 people over the day. So that was really something.
Which nonprofit did you land at?
It was a building, but we worked for a
Crayons and
couple.
Crayons?
No, that was a different one. We just we made food kits and hygiene kits and blankets that are gonna be shipped out. So I don't know if it was for a specific nonprofit.
Yeah.
It's great.
Good stuff.
Very cool. Did you work closely with other 8th graders, like
Yeah.
from other towns? So what other towns did you interact with?
Townshend, Amherst, all these different places around Massachusetts on the bus. It was just everywhere, all these aspiring students that just wanted to be there and work. No one was trying to get on each other's nerves or anything. Everyone working together. So it was really something special with that many 8th graders and no one causing a commotion. Very impressive, honestly.
Like, what a great.
Self-awareness is what we're
Yeah,
talking
exactly.
about, by the way.
What a great leader leadership opportunity
Yeah.
for you and to represent Concord in the way you did. We really appreciate everything that you did and bringing it back to us and bring it back to your students and your school and your teachers, your principal, assistant principal. It's really impressive.
I mean, we can never understate the impact the 351 ambassadors have had. How many years ago? I mean, that is where the Playbook Initiative started
Yeah.
for us as a district. So this is your audience this year, Felix, to keep bringing ideas and making sure we're listening.
I have a question for you, Felix. What did this inspire you to do next?
Just maybe do more community service because it felt really good. We're doing a clothing drive for Cradles to Crayons later, so just work really hard at that and just kind of help people more in general.
Good way to start.
Excellent.
Thank you very much for giving up some of your Wednesday night and coming here. We really appreciate it. It's super cool.
And Saturday.
Yes.
And
Saturday, yeah.
And he's a skier or a snowboard.
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 Was it cold at which you said?
It was really cold.
Really
Yeah,
cold.
really cold, but it was really fun.
He took prime Saturday snowboarding time
Yeah.
to go to the state house.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Felix.
Congrats.
Thanks, Olive.
Yep.
All right. Our last item. Bob, wanna bring it home?
Sure, this is not quite as exciting. You might recall we talked about the creation of a special ed stabilization fund. We didn't vote on it during our budget deliberations, and we tabled it for this. We did present it then, give you time to review it. I recommend that we do it primarily because that we create the fund, we don't worry about funding it yet, primarily because we have so little students out of district now that we don't really have a safety net of we're not gonna have a safety net of circuit breaker funds. And this would give us a mechanism to put some funds aside. And we can work out how to put funds aside later, but I think the creation of the fund itself would be non-controversial. If it ends up being controversial, we can always withdraw it. Like I don't see why it would be controversial, but if there's any concerns from the town side, we certainly can hear those. But again, this is just to create the fund. What you can do is let's just say we had money at the end of the year that was available to put into it. We could get authorization to put money left over in our budget into it. So there's different ways to fund it. We're not asking for money to fund it, we're just asking to create the fund. I realized I didn't have warrant language. I don't know, I think you usually see that. I can share the language if you want, but usually the town council would review it anyways and potentially amend it. So if you want, I can show you that. If not, I'm just requesting your approval for us to bring to the town a warrant for the creation of a special ed stabilization fund.
And this would then go to all of the hearings, it would be reviewed by town council, and it would be a vote at town meeting.
Yeah, and I would have the
And there's
same
no dollar amount
Zero.
tied to
dollar
it.
amount. It's just to create the fund, like when we created the non-resident tuition fund, when we created something else, the facility revolving fund.
Yeah.
Those were similar, where we didn't ask for money, we just asked to create the funds. This one won't fund automatically, we'll have to figure out a way to fund it, but I didn't wanna have to introduce the fund and explain that at one time, and then try to explain the funding another time. I thought it would be easier to get this approved, and then we can figure out how to fund it later.
And the only way to create the fund is really a town meeting, so you have one shot a year to create the fund.
Right, we have
Okay.
one shot to create it, and the rules are, that there is collaboration with the town. It gets approved at town meeting. If we actually wanted to spend from it, the school committee and the select board would authorize it. It doesn't need to go to town meeting again. We can't unilaterally use the funds if we get money in it, but we can use it if we approve it and the select board approves it. So that would be a situation where we have some really unexpected costs.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's not the case at some point, but better to be a prudent plan.
Just a point of information, this actually came up in the conversation with the select board, the 12th.
Oh, it did?
It did, and at least to my ear, it seemed that there was some resistance.
That's fine, I'm happy to explain it to them. If they resist, we could always, I don't think if they hear what we're presenting, that there's a reason to be against it.
Was it this fund specifically or the creation of, because like last year's town meeting, didn't finance committee try and create?
This was, well, if we were talking about the adversity that would be facing Carlisle because of the
That's
student
capital,
The
I think,
assessment.
oh, okay, I mean, sorry, finish, I might.
I guess I would have you cause I watch it because when I got the agenda out, I thought, gee, did I just hear about that? It's from the January 12th select board meeting, about an hour and 48 minutes in.
Okay,
They discuss special education stabilization fund.
okay.
And just doing a cursory read there, if you had to get it passed, it wasn't going to.
Yeah, and maybe they
So
don't
I
have
think
context,
there
yeah.
might be grounds to look at both the argument that I recall was to they made an analogy to the Minuteman High School, looking at rolling averages to try and prevent the ups and downs for the other supporting schools, and they made that argument as a counter argument for having this special education stabilization fund. So I would just make you aware of that to look at that going forward.
So this will go through the formal process and
Yeah.
in March we'll be at a public hearing with the finance
Yeah.
committee and usually the select board's engaged, so.
Yeah.
But the time to request it is right now.
Yeah, and the deadline,
warrant
the
closes
real
Friday,
deadline is
yeah.
Friday, so, but that'll be good to know that we are probably gonna have some questions.
It's also easier to explain it in person.
Yeah,
They could
yeah.
be confusing the capital stabilization we're talking about in the region. And the rolling average relates to just the regional assessment. So I think I'm confident we can address questions in person. If they aren't supportive of it, so be it, but I think there might be information that we could give them that might change their view.
Just point of information.
Someone wanna be
So I'm-
brave enough and do a motion?
I'll do it. I move to create a special education stabilization fund for Concord Public Schools.
Is the
Any discussion?
is the motion about the creation of the fund or about a warrant?
A warrant,
warrants.
only town meeting can create the.
Oh,
Yeah,
so, oh,
You need to reference the warrant.
okay, I'm gonna withdraw that motion. I'm gonna let Carrie,
Not what I
Whoa.
intended. Okay, I move that we vote to approve a warrant to create special education stabilization.
I'll second. Any more discussion?
Thanks, Carrie.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Alright.
Abstain.
Okay. Alright. I don't have anything else. I adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.